said, we had the great pleasure of being in Romania 2 weeks ago, and it was just an amazing experience with Elvis and Alina. We had a chance to meet Rich and Barb Leary. I think Rich is on this call as well, and some, we were with another couple, and it just, the Romanian people are just an incredible and beautiful people, and a real fire and an entrepreneurial spirit. And, it was just eye-opening that all over the world, there's a hunger for success, but more than that, a hunger for significance. And, I think I bring some things that are helpful to the table when it comes to leadership. But possibly the best thing that I can talk about is the thing that I have done the most, which is successfully reinvent myself or being reinvented over a long, 40 plus year career. I told you about my quick journey of faith as a young man where my life turned around. Well, I immediately thought that meant I was going to be a minister. So I thought, I wanted to go into ministry. And I went to college, got my degree in Greek and Latin. I wanted to be able to read the New Testament in Greek, which I learned to do. And then went into the ministry and did that for 7 years until I failed at it. And I'm going to talk more about that as we get to the end of our 35-minute presentation. So I had to reinvent myself, and I became a businessman, and I got hired by what was a budding industry, microcomputer manufacturing. It was maybe 50 million in sales. And over the next 7 or 8 years, we grew up to about $1 billion in sales. And I went from a sales rep to leading the entire national sales team of about 100 salespeople throughout the nation. And it was just an incredible ride. At the top of that, I saw the hardware business coming to an end. So I thought, well, I can hop off at the top and try to reinvent myself again, or I can ride this thing to the bottom, because it was clearly going to be turning the corner and hardware was going to become a commodity. And so I decided to go into something completely different and partnered with my very talented brother-in-law in the outsourcing business, doing copy centers for law firms, of which I knew nothing about. And once again, reinvented myself. We took that company and we built it up into 24 cities in the United States and Canada, built it up to about 100 million in sales annually, and we sold it to a publicly traded American company in 1996. I retired briefly at 40 and realized, retirement wasn't for me, and, began to cast about. And a few years later, was offered an opportunity to go into commercial real estate, which I knew nothing about. And at 47 years old, I reinvented myself again and became a commercial real estate advisor and a real estate broker, chasing big whales. And as Elvis said, it's not a business where you make a salary or you make a bonus, but you kind of live and die by the deals you do. So it's a very high risk, high beta kind of business. And that's been my life for the last 20 years. And to make it more complicated, I prefer to chase big deals, big whales. That's where my skill was, in trying to land the big corporate retailers in this case. And they take a lot of years to win those assignments and to gain their trust. But we have a wonderful team, and I'm going to talk more about that too. So anyway, reinventing yourself, or how to love uncertainty. And let's go back 22 years and look at the top 10 companies in the world. You recognize all of them. Most of you will. You have, of the top 10 companies in the world 22 years ago, the year 2000, you had 9 American companies and 1 Finnish company. Now we're going to advance 20 years, and we're going to look at the top 10 countries, or top 10 companies from just last year. And these are all names we certainly recognize. And I would tell you that you probably saw that there is only one company from 22 years ago that is still one of the top 10 companies in the world. That's not to say those companies went out of business, but some of them have become pretty irrelevant. If you go back and look at those names, I'm not going to name who they are, but you look at those names and you go, wow, okay. General Electric was booted out of the Dow 30. Nokia, I think they're still in business. AT&T is, I'm not going to say they've become irrelevant, because they haven't, but they're not the same. I think Microsoft is still there. My question for you is, let's advance 20 years. What do you think? Who's going to be on this list of the top 10 companies in the world? Do you think it's a fair proposition to say that there are probably only 1 or 2 names here, maybe, that will be still in that top 10 list? I think that's a pretty safe bet. That's how rough and hard being relevant, reinventing, keeping up, changing, adapting is. It's just too difficult. And companies that were great, even Jeff Bezos of Amazon, the biggest company in the world, at least at the time of this ranking, says, I know my company's going to be out of business one day. That's a smart man, because he's right. Amazon will be out of business one day. We don't know when that will be, but they will be out of business because who knows? They will become irrelevant, or they won't keep up, or they won't adapt. They won't change. They'll get stuck in their ways. So that's what we're here to talk about, is not specific detail things, though I do want to talk a little about that, but high-level principles that I think can govern having a creative heart and a creative mind and a reinventive spirit that puts yourself in a position to do just that. If you listed the biggest challenges you face in business, I think we would all agree on that list would be the pace of change. It's crazy. The short lifespan of a technological edge. It used to be 5, 6 years. What does a technological edge now last? What, a year, maybe 2? How rapid are things commoditized, our products and services? I mean, they're innovative at first, and then they're a commodity a year or 2 later. And what happens to that when they become commodities? Our margins go down, and ultimately we possibly even lose money on them. And then how about strategies that work now that have started working less or have stopped working altogether? I'm just amazed at how a strategy that works stops working, but that's what's happening now. And we have to continually be in a state where we're thinking about how that affects us as leaders, how we're leading people into change and into reinvention and into uncertainty. And as Elvis well said, VUCA. So I went to college to learn Greek because I wanted to learn how to read the New Testament, which is my favorite book on reinvention. But I became exposed to some ancient classical Greek authors that took me by surprise. And quickly, as a 20-year young man, I adopted what became and has become possibly my second favorite book on reinvention, this book right here. This is in ancient Greek. The title is in English. It's The Apology by Plato, and it's about the trial of Socrates. Socrates was put on trial at 70 years old for corrupting the minds of young people. And, back in those days in ancient Athens, you had a jury of 500 men. Now in America, we have 12. And the way it works in a jury trial in America is it's got to be 12 to 0 to be convicted. If you have one person that says, nah, I think they're innocent, then that's the way it goes. The trial is either a mistrial or they're innocent. In ancient Athens, with the 500 jurors, it just had to be a single majority of one. A tie went to the defendant. So out of 500, if it had been 250 to 250, Socrates would have been declared innocent and free. He was actually convicted 280 to 220, a 60 vote difference. He was declared guilty, sentenced to die, and executed a few weeks later as a 70-year-old lover of his and citizen of his city. He said at the trial many profound things, and that's what this book is about. It's a book about the many profound things that he said at that trial, and it is full of principles on how to reinvent yourself. Some of the first principles, as Aristotle would say, on what has to happen to have a heart and a mind and a spirit that's capable of reinvention. And it's quickly become my second favorite book on the very subject. In fact, I like to take this book on sales calls. When I go meet with CEOs and CFOs, I take this book in. I often put it down on the desk and I talk about it. And one of the things I talk about is possibly his most famous quote at his trial, and it's this one right here. The unexamined life is not worth living. He was convinced that if you were not willing to subject everything about your life to examination, that's not a life I want to live. I want to live a life where I'm willing to be challenged. I'm willing to be questioned. I'm willing to journey with people who speak truth to me. I'm willing to journey with people who talk about the future to me. And that's the life he wanted to live. And that's who he was, and ancient Athens couldn't tolerate his constant examination of his fellow Athenians, particularly the young people who were very attracted to him. He had this giant follower of millennials back in those days and of Z generation kind, and he was 70 years old, attracting those kind of people to him. You know, I'm not that far from 70 years old. I'm thinking we've got a few 70-something septuagenarians here on this call, maybe a few. Wouldn't it be something special if 20 and 30-something-year-old people were attracted to you and wanted to hang around you because you were so relevant? You were so reinventing yourself. You were so in the present as well as thinking about the future. That's who Socrates was. And that's why this is something that I think is a good foundation to begin with. Well, that's the book I use to put down on a decision maker's desk when I want them to think about making a decision. Because to make a decision to choose me, to help them, means a couple of things. They're going to have to take the time to do it, which they don't have. They're possibly going to have to get rid of the current vendor that's given them mediocre service, which is energy that I don't have. Yeah, I may even be more expensive, which means they have to spend money they don't want to spend. So I'm asking a decision maker to take time they don't have, to make a change they don't really, I'm getting okay service, but not great service, but it's too painful to make a change, and to spend money that I don't want to spend. Those are 3 strikes against me. The only chance I have is to challenge a decision maker that the unexamined life is not worth living. You have to be willing to have a philosophy as a business leader, to be subjected to examination, to stay relevant, to stay in business, to stay successful, and ultimately be significant. And as a result of these efforts, these are our 3 biggest clients. They're possibly names you've not heard of, but Costco is the 24th largest company in America. Lowe's is the 31st largest company in America. Dollar General is the 91st largest company in America. And, we're very proud to have them as clients. I hope they're proud to have us as real estate providers for what they need us to do. But these are the whales that we chase, that Elvis talked about, that have taken us years to win their trust. And now that we have them, I hope they love us. We love them, and we want to continue to stay relevant for them. So here's the first principle. I use the word calling. I should use the word purpose or destiny. It's a word you hear a lot. It's a word that you're challenged with a lot. But I use the word calling, not because it has a spiritual connotation, but because it has a connotation that this purpose that you have comes from outside of yourself. It's bigger than you. This purpose is bigger than me. I can draw a purpose from within myself, but I really want to have a purpose and a destiny that's bigger than me, that's outside of me, that's beyond me, of which I am perfectly content to be a small part of. I just want to make sure, can I be a small part of something that is very large and giant? And so I use the word calling. We absolutely have to find what that calling is. We have to hear that voice that calls us to something greater than who we are. As a business leader, you have to be part of something bigger than just your business. It doesn't matter how humble your business is. And I've been part of a very humble business. We figured out how to become part of something really big. And we packaged ourselves as part of something really big. And thus we attracted employees, we attracted talent. We built up into 24 cities, and we built a successful company and had a successful transaction, selling it to a bigger company. But it's all because we took a humble business at the bottom of the food chain and figured out how to be a part of something bigger. So is why really the most important question? I think that's a worthy discussion. I personally believe it is, but I think it's a fair question to ask, is why it? Because that's really what we're talking about, is what is your why? But I think that's a hard question sometimes to get to. And it's a hard question to get to for a lot of reasons. And we don't have time to go into all the reasons. So sometimes I think it's better to try to answer other questions like, who am I? Who am I really? Who does God think I am? Where am I supposed to be? I mean, sometimes those questions, although they're hard to, are easier to get to. And once you start out on the journey of where, and you start out on the journey of some solid identity, the being informed on the purpose and the calling on the why begins to reveal itself. So just something to think about. I'd like for us to talk about that more. We didn't have time this morning. Here's what Socrates said about himself. He said, I'm the stinging fly to the lazy horse of Athens. Here's what he was saying. That's who I am. He wasn't talking about his why. He was talking about his who and his what. This is who I am. I'm a little stinging fly to the lazy horse of Athens. Athens in the 5th century BC was the greatest city in the world, producing artists and poets and authors and amazing politicians, experimenting with democracy. And yet the world didn't experiment with democracy for another, 20, almost 2,000 years. An incredible shining moment in the world was this ancient, classical, amazing city, Athens. Socrates saw himself as a tiny, tiny part of something that was really large. But that tiny part, he made it clear, this is what he made it clear. They're going to know who I am, and they're going to hear what I have to say. And so he wasn't just a little fly. He was a stinging fly, harassing this big, noble, beautiful, giant, lazy horse that needed to be stirred out of its slumber. That's how he thought of himself. Well, his big why, as a result of that, was I spend all my time going about trying to persuade you, young and old, to make your chief concern, not for your body or your possessions, but for the highest welfare of your souls. I can't think of anything more beautiful when it comes to a why. That's been my why for 50 years. I didn't really know it. I didn't really crystallize for me till later in life, but that really was it, that I wanted to be part of a journey that chased men's souls, that pursued people's hearts. And in the pursuing of their hearts and their souls, can I have a profession? Can I be a businessman? Well, I can, and I could, and I did, but it's much more than that. It's being a husband, being a father, being a son, being a brother, being a nephew, being an uncle, being a business leader, being a friend. A purpose, a why, informs all of that. So here's what I suggest to you. And Elvis, I need you to keep me on the clock here. I think, we might not get to the end of this.
No, you're good.
I don't know how you have a purpose professionally without having a purpose personally. And I don't know how you have a purpose personally without having a purpose spiritually. I think I see people do it, I think, but I can't process that. For me, my spiritual purpose, my personal purpose, and my professional purpose all have a commonality. They all have something that is the same at the core. My spiritual purpose informs who I am personally, which informs who I am as a business leader. We so often try to put our lives in buckets. Americans are famous for this, where we want our professional life Monday through Friday, my personal life on Saturday, and maybe my spiritual life on Sunday, or not at all. And more often than not at all. So my personal life is Saturday, Sunday. And we put them in buckets. And yet the impact that we make of significance and success is right there in the center where it all intersects. And you say, well, how does it intersect? Does it intersect with time? Well, maybe. Does it intersect with place? Yeah, well, maybe. Where it really intersects is with your purpose, with your why, with your calling. So this is the business that I was telling you that we built. I worked on the second floor of this building for 2 years in Washington, D.C., left my family behind in Atlanta. It's a hard deal, mostly for my wife and kids than it was for their dad, who was gone for 2 and 3 weeks at a time, coming home maybe one weekend every 2. But, we were building a business, a little humble business that just took over copy centers for law firms. It was so boring when people asked what I did. I said, let's not talk about me. Let's talk about you. Because whatever you do has to be far more interesting than what I'm doing. But what we decided to do is, okay, we've got a humble little business that has a big need, and we have big ambitions, and we want to build it, and we want to recruit talented people. How are we going to do this? We realized that we were at the cusp, at the beginning of a big wave in American business. And that big wave in American business was called outsourcing. Outsourcing of everything. As companies were outsourcing their non-core parts of their business that they did not do very well. And it became a wave from IT to what we were doing, to HR services, to recruiting. Companies began to outsource all over the place so they could function on the core of what they really did well. And that's how we packaged our business. We said, listen, yeah, we're doing copy centers for law firms as law firms are getting out of the copy center business. But what we're really a part of is a big wave in what's going on in American business. And people caught that vision. And they said, yeah, that sounds exciting. The business itself, kind of boring, but being a part of something big that's going on in the United States in the way we do business, I'd like to learn that. I'd like to learn about that. I'd like to understand what outsourcing looks like. So that's what we did. And we, quite frankly, we did it very well. And we built a great company, and we probably sold it too early. People that we sold that business to we sold it at $100 million. They turned it into over $1 billion. So, who knows? But anyway, it was a great team and a great business and a great lesson on learning to be a part of something that was bigger than ourselves. I'm going to talk about the second quality here, courage. That seems obvious, but I'm going to make it less obvious. Some of us are natural risk takers. I probably lean that way a little bit. Maybe, I've done some stupid things in my life, hunt black bear with pistols, dive, climb one of the tallest mountains in the US. I've done some silly and maybe even stupid things, learned to fly. My dad was a pilot. I got into, there's some really good pilots out there. I guess I wasn't that good at it. I kept getting in weather situations that were over my head. And one time I had my dad's plane up. I think I was 19 at the time, and I couldn't land it. I was in a storm and I couldn't get it on the ground, and I had to keep going around and couldn't keep it on track. And I finally put it on the ground and crashed my dad's plane. Now, this is not the plane, because his plane that I crashed looked far worse than this. Somehow the plane stayed upright. It must have been an angel holding it up, because it smashed the wings, smashed the prop, smashed the front. And somehow I ended up upright, ended up in the paper the next day, embarrassingly, as a young man. And but that's not really the kind of crazy, risk-taking silliness. It's one thing to call your dad and say, Dad, I wrecked your car. I promise you, it's really hard to call him up and say, Dad, I wrecked your plane. That's possibly one of the hardest phone calls I've ever had to make in my life. My dad's a good man, and telling him I crashed his plane was absolutely no fun. He was glad I was safe, but he got kind of angry after that. Anyway, so here's what I want to tell you about courage. Again, my friend Socrates, where a man has once taken up his stand, either because it seems best to him or in obedience to orders, there I believe he's bound to remain and face the danger. Socrates was a warrior, but he did not become a soldier, but he fought and was courageous. He didn't want to be a politician, although he had to serve. But his story here is, once you figure out what your purpose is, you make your stand, and there's nothing you're afraid of. And that's what he was saying to that jury of 500 men. And here's what I want to tell you. The reason it's so important for you to get to your why, to get to your purpose, to get to your calling, because true courage, not fake courage like I had as a young man, true courage is birthed out of knowing your purpose and your destiny. Look at a particular leader in Eastern Europe right now, who most of us would say, man found his destiny. Surprising? That's not what we would have expected. But the man found his destiny, and what's come out of that purpose and destiny is extraordinary courage. It's been an example to the world. And we marvel at it because it's so rare. And that's sad that that kind of courage is so rare. But be it rare, it doesn't have to be, because I think it's rare because most people don't know what their calling is. They don't know what their purpose and destiny is. I can work up courage. I can fight for courage. I can spend most of my time being afraid of uncertainty and risk and change and failure. But if I have purpose, courage is easy. I'm telling you, and I think you that know your why, that know your purpose, that know your calling, you know what I'm talking about. Courage is not hard. It's an easy choice. And then your courage is revealed by what kind of relationship you have with risk, uncertainty, change, and ultimately failure. For much of my life, all those were my enemy. Risk, maybe not so much because I liked risk, but uncertainty, change, and failure were all my enemy. They weren't my friend. But when you have courage, they become your friend. I was struggling with having failed so many times in different ways and personally and whatnot. And finally, my very wise uncle set me down in one of my most discouraged moments as a young man. And he said, Shan, your failures have not disqualified you. On the contrary, they've qualified you. And I knew that. I knew it in my heart, but I needed somebody outside of me to affirm it to me. That I need to embrace them. I need to make those failures and all those changes and all those uncertainties my friend and be courageous because I got a why and I have a purpose. My second career, Elvis, again, wave at me when I think we're pretty much over time here, are we not?
We're good. We still have 5 more minutes.
Okay, so I'm going to skip over this a little bit, and I want to go right to creativity in our last 5 minutes and say, thank you, Shan. That's awesome. I'm glad I signed up for this webinar for you to tell me that I need to be creative. Well, I hope I surprise you because creativity is directly proportional to a culture's response to failure. When you're courageous because you have a why, failure becomes a bit of a friend. It becomes something that informs how you go about your business in your life. And rather than being afraid of it, you learn from it and take from it and become something different. I mean, I think America has an extraordinary environment to do business in, and it's directly proportional because we tolerate failure. You can fail in a business and still raise capital and do it again. You can go bankrupt multiple times, and as long as it wasn't an ethical problem, you just had an idea that didn't work, you probably can raise money and get another shot. There's a lot that's wrong about America, but there's a lot that's right. And one of the things that's right about America is our business response to failure. As a result, we're innovative, creative, and unless we start to punish failure, it will always be that way. But you watch, if our nation starts to punish business failure, you're going to watch creativity die. You're going to watch innovation die because it's directly proportional to a culture's response to failure. And here's the Greek word I want to leave you with, aphesis. This Greek word means liberty, to be set free, but really it's the word that Jesus Christ used more often than any other word. It means forgiveness. And the reason the New Testament is my favorite book on reinvention, because it talks about the one thing that has to happen for reinvention of any sort to take place in our life. We have to be able to process failure. Our failure, our spouse's failure, our kids' failures, the people that we lead's failures, our own leaders' failures. We have to be able to process failure. I don't know how anybody can process failure without understanding the powerful principle of aphesis, of forgiveness. When you hold a grudge, you've put your spirit in a prison. You've put your mind in a prison. Your human spirit is naturally creative. Your human spirit is naturally wanting to give birth to ideas. But when you hold grudges and when you want to pay people back and you have vengeance in your heart and you hold things closely and don't allow yourself to be set free, I think it squeezes the creativity out of all of us. And it's hard to reinvent myself as a husband or as a friend or as a businessman. I got no shot. I got no chance without this concept. Even Socrates said that, and this is one of the most vengeful cultures in ancient history. And then Solomon said, a righteous man falls 7 times and rises again, meaning your righteousness is defined by you getting back up, which is brilliant. And then Jesus, when asked how many times do you forgive somebody, 7 times, he said, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. You know, the thing about the teachings on forgiveness of Jesus Christ is that they're impossible. He always gave us a standard that was ridiculously impossible to achieve. That's why Christians are called hypocrites all around the world, because the standard is so high, it's impossible, but with human achievement and human effort to ever get there. It has to be from some supernatural power from without to even begin to come close to operating at the standard. But his point's a good one. It should be the standard, because if you get there, you're a human that is set free, and now you're in position to be reinvented and reinvent yourself in every way you possibly can. And I'll wrap up on this. This was my first job I talked about as a minister. This was one of the little churches that I had out in the country. About 6 years into my budding career as a young minister, I was 20 by that time, I married this little girl, and yeah, that's me. I don't know, do you see any similarities? She still looks pretty much the same. I think life's been a little rough on me, I'm thinking. What do you think? Her father was not very happy. She was 17, I was 20. Her father was a smart man. Our marriage failed 7 years later, and we divorced. And I could not see, wow, being in the ministry, being divorced, being a failed husband, failed father. We had 2 sons. I just couldn't reconcile that. I just couldn't say, how can I be in the ministry and be such a failure as a human being? And I left the ministry, and I had to reinvent myself and become a businessman. And I've been a businessman for the last 40 years. But I got to tell you, the thing, my wife and I remarried a year later, this same little girl. I remarried, and we've been now married for 44 years and have beautiful sons and beautiful grandchildren. And, we're so grateful. Every year on our anniversary, we just remind ourselves of how grateful we are that we forgave each other, that we chose to reinvent ourselves as a husband and a wife, and chose to reinvent ourselves as a father and a mother, that we stuck it out. It was hard. It was even a hard 20 years after the forgiveness. The thing about that faith experience I told you about as a young man when I was through Campus Crusade at that time is it didn't teach me as much about success as it taught me about failure. That you can get through failure, that you can get through uncertainty, that you can process failure. And if you process it in the right way, you'll be set free. You will liberate your human spirit into a place of creativity, into a place of courage, and into a place of calling that will change who you are as a business leader, as a human being. And that's my message to you today. And I appreciate the audience.